Hari Hari. So we've come up to now the fourth chapter. Krishna ended the third chapter talking about Gyan, right? Arjuna asked question, how is it, my dear Krishna, that the living entity oftentimes engages in activities or performs activities that are counterproductive or not beneficial for itself, and we engage in these activities as if impelled by some outside force. And Krishna says, lust. We're driven by an insatiable desire. And this lust covers our pure consciousness. Krishna then says this pure consciousness has to be destroyed by the weapon of knowledge. That's how Krishna ended the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, telling Arjuna, destroy this insatiable enemy known as kama, lust, with the weapon of knowledge. Enter the fourth chapter. Krishna uses the term yoga. Imam vivasvate yogam proktavat aham avyayam. In the third chapter, Krishna ended by saying this, our pure consciousness is covered by lust. In this pure consciousness, Krishna uses the term jnana. That's the word he uses to describe this pure knowledge that we have. And then Krishna says it should be lust cut by knowledge, the weapon of knowledge. When we enter the fourth chapter, Krishna then says, this knowledge was thus received, so I explained this transcendental knowledge to the sun god, Vivasvan. But now Krishna is using the term yoga, whereas in the third chapter, Krishna was saying jnana, jnana, jnana. It is interesting now to see that the fourth chapter is called Jnana Yoga. So what may have seemed to have been theoretical, right? The term jnana has a theoretical academic connotation, is lent to that term jnana. Krishna now throws in the term yoga, which has a more active connotation. And Krishna is saying this yoga, that we've talked about in the third chapter, this yoga I gave to Vivasvan. And it was passed down from Vivasvan to Manu to Ikshvaku and so forth. And what I find to be very interesting about the fourth chapter, although there are many things, because the fourth chapter covers jnana in relation to work, how when we have transcendental knowledge, pure knowledge, in relation to work, our work is transformed. And then Krishna goes on to talk about how to get this transcendental knowledge, what happens when we get this transcendental knowledge. He ends chapter 4 on that. But what I find very, very interesting for me is the third verse of the fourth chapter, wherein Krishna says, because you're my devotee as well as my friend, you can therefore understand this knowledge. In the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna very clearly describes what knowledge is. Knowledge is matter, understanding of matter and its place, what its functions are, what its attributes and inherent nature is, and what spirit is, what the soul is, Atman. And how are the two connected, interrelated, how do they function together? This is knowledge, clearly defined by Krishna in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So when Krishna talks about knowledge, this is what he's essentially talking about, Atma Tattva. That is Krishna's definition of knowledge. A person who is in knowledge has Atma Tattva, knows the science of the Atma, because that includes how the Atma interacts with material nature. All of it, Atma Tattva. That is knowledge. And Krishna says in the fourth chapter that because, my dear Arjuna, you are my devotee, and this is the first time Krishna uses the word bhakta. He's not used it before. He will not use it again until the seventh chapter, wherein he will actually describe bhakti as a process of spiritual development. He's never done that before. Krishna's talked about as early as the second chapter, right? Krishna talked about Sankhya. It's a process of spiritual development. Karma, yoga as a process of spiritual development. Buddhi yoga as a process of spiritual development. Never brings up bhakti as a process of spiritual development until the 7th chapter. Krishna even brings up Astanga yoga as a process for spiritual development in the 6th chapter. Does not do so about bhakti until the 7th chapter. Although, in the 4th chapter, he says, my dear Arjuna, because you are a bhakta, you can understand transcendental knowledge. You can understand this science of Atma Tattva that can destroy, can slash through kama that we talked about in the 3rd chapter. It can reawaken the pure consciousness of the living entity. You can understand this Atma Tattva. You can understand this Gyan because Bhakto Sime Sakha. Sakha means friend. Because you are my devotee as well as my friend. This is a very, very powerful. Sometimes we zip past, the first few verses of the 4th chapter to get to the meaty portions of the 4th chapter, because the 4th chapter does get quite complex after about the 15th verse. Krishna starts describing how knowledge and karma, when acted upon, when it comes together, then that synthesized endeavor of karma with yoga, liberation can be achieved. And in fact, Krishna subtly indicates that that's bhakti yoga. But the 4th chapter, after text 15, gets very, very interesting in describing karma in relation to yoga, in relation to jnana, transcendental knowledge. What is the results of jnana? What is the result of mixing karma and jnana together? What do you get? It's all very interesting. So we zip past these 3 verses of the 4th chapter, which, for me, just me, I find to be critically important. First of all, it's describing that Krishna says, I've given this science to the sun god. That statement in and of itself has enormous ramifications, right? Arjuna even asks Krishna, says, my dear Krishna, the sun god is older than you. How is it possible that you could have told this to the sun god? It makes no sense. Obviously indicating that when Krishna answers this question, he tells Arjuna, well, actually, I'm older than the sun god, thank you very much. And tells Arjuna, so are you. And then goes on to say, you can understand this because you are my devotee and friend. That's the qualification for understanding Atma Tattva. Bhakti. Bhakti. Bhakti is the qualification for understanding, realizing Atma Tattva. This is critically important because sometimes we think we have to go through mental gymnastics. Through mental gymnastics, we cannot understand Atma Tattva through our own mental gymnastics. It is through bhakti and the reciprocal prasad, the reciprocal mercy of Krishna, that we gain Atma Tattva. Krishna says this later on. 7 verses later, Yeya tamam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham. Is all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Bhakta, engaging with Krishna through bhakti, Krishna rewards accordingly, bestows the realization of Atma Tattva, where there is a genuine understanding, a genuine realization, and an ability to then act on Atma Tattva. Bhakti is the foundation. That's what these first verses of the 4th chapter indicate. Bhakti is the foundation. From bhakti, comes the realizations of all of this Gyan that Krishna is talking about. Atma Tattva and beyond. How to activate, or rather infuse, our activities with Gyan so that our activities are liberating. The foundation is bhakti. That for me is a wonderful significance of the 4th chapter and these first 3 verses of the 4th chapter. Hari Hari.